So perhaps you too have been feeling the desire to go deeper, this hunger, this desire to feel satiated in your life and your connections in a way that you haven't experienced before. Perhaps, like me, you have been feeling that the more superficial ways of relating, or perhaps even just the standardized ways of relating in the world and in your intimate connections, isn't quite doing it for you. There is this burgeoning desire within us to be met, seen, heard, held in ways that are actually quite pioneering in comparison to what we've been used to on Earth up until this point, or at least in recent history. And so in today's video, we're going to be exploring what is required of us in order for us to be able to access the depth that we're deeply hungry for. How do we go to those places within ourselves and in connection? And actually, why this is so essential. It's actually medicine. This hunger we're feeling for depth of connection is medicine and an antidote to the warring, egoic ways that are so prevalent on Earth. Hello, beautiful leaders, architects, and pioneers of the new Earth. I'm Natasha. This is the home of embodied spirituality, integrated awakening, and new Earth architecting. This is a spontaneous video today. I hadn't planned to film, but the message is so alive in me and it's so alive in my consciousness. And so we're just going to let what flows flow. But I really have felt this call to start translating the wisdom that I've been assimilating from the recent Mars retrograde process, and we're still in a Mars retrograde process. And this Mars retrograde process, if we're thinking about it archetypally and the energies that we're being offered, it's really a reformation and a reconfiguration of our masculine energy, how we take action in the world, how we do things, boundaries, how we handle conflict. So that's a whole video that I'm going to make about how our doing aspect is being completely reconfigured right now on Earth, and it's necessary, it's so needed. This video, I want to speak about how the antidote to these kind of warring, conflict-based ways of relating, both at a micro level and at a macro level, is actually something that we're all deeply hungry for, I feel, that we're actually feeling starved of, but doesn't come easily in a society that has made it so normal to be disconnected from the heart, disconnected from the body, disconnected from truth, and sort of just perpetuate very automated ways of being. So this hunger I'm speaking about is a hunger for intimacy. Have you been feeling this? Have you been feeling that the connections you're in, or the relationship dynamics that you engage in, that they're not quite getting there, that they're not quite nourishing and satiating and quenching the thirst for what you really want? And what you really want is to be seen and to see others more deeply. It's to be held and to hold others more deeply. It's to be heard and to hear others with more depth, with more truth. It is a hunger of wanting to move beyond superficiality, move beyond autopilot ways of relating, these kind of conditioned, habitual ways that we've been used to being in relationships, and to pattern interrupt those habituated ways, and to allow what is true and what is organic and what is raw and what is real to lead the way. This is certainly a hunger that's been arising within me. It's been arising within my intimate connection with my partner. It's been arising within my friendships. And I have really beautiful, rich friendships in so many ways. I have a really conscious network of beings around me. And yet I've noticed that even in those spaces, this hunger is alive, and it is a hunger for more. I want to be seen and held and witnessed, and I want to be in a space of belonging where all of the most fallible, vulnerable, raw parts of me are seen, welcomed, and vice versa. I also want to be the one seeing and holding and weaving it into belonging those parts for other people. It is a desire to return to true belonging, true community in its deepest, richest sense of the word. To come back to the embrace of the highest expression of the tribe. To the times when we would create art together and tell our stories around the fire and sing and dance and grieve together. This is still alive in some indigenous cultures, and certain pockets around the world still hold on to, retain, and continue to live from this wisdom. But for most people, especially in the Western world, where these traditions and the indigenous ways of the land and the people there have been bulldozed over, and in its place something very superficial and extractive has been implemented. And the current paradigm that we're largely operating from is one of consumption. So the focus is on what can I get? What can I harvest? What can I extract? Because our life force energy is being harvested by the matrix in this current depraved system. And it's a consciousness. It's not one group of people. It's not one race. Unfortunately, it's never that simple, and people like to, again, the warring consciousness wants to point fingers. It's that race, it's that group. No, it's a consciousness. It's a consciousness that transcends race, gender, religious system. And that consciousness is really intent on harvesting and extracting because it's severed from love and it's actually beyond human. And so as those who are having our life force extracted, we also need to then extract and consume to try and fill what has been taken. The soul is being raped. The soul of the earth is being raped. Our own souls have been raped countless times on earth. So when there is that level of dehumanization, desensitization to our humanity, to the sacred, it takes an awful toll, a horrid toll on us as beings, as sentient beings. And I feel that this hunger that is arising, and it's arising in my networks, it's arising with people that I'm working with, it's arising in conversations, random conversations I'm having. People are hungry. We recognize that we've been eating fast food relationally, when what we're hungry for is true nourishment. And I don't eat fast food anymore, but when I used to, I would always have this experience where I'd eat, you eat your burger, your fries, whatever you have, and then very soon after I'd feel hungry again. And it wasn't so much that I was hungry, it was because my body didn't receive the nourishment and what it actually needed from that meal. That's how I equate modern day relating. There's a sense of we're filling ourselves, but it's not touching the sides. It's not actually satiating and meeting the deepest needs and desires we have in connection. And there is a deep hunger that is alive within us to feel each other more deeply. Because when we start to come into deeper states of intimacy and vulnerability, we also meet ourselves more deeply. And so this is sort of part 2 of this conversation. If part 1 is we recognize there's a hunger to go deeper for more intimacy, how? How do we go there? And the answer is vulnerability, but even the answer of vulnerability is nuanced, because I think we have been sold, especially through social media, a version of vulnerability, or perhaps a masquerading presence of vulnerability, where maybe we think that vulnerability means showing more of ourselves physically, right? Maybe that's, by having less clothes on. Or maybe there is a sense that vulnerability means telling you a lot about myself. Like, here's this is all the information you need to know. Or it means in some way showing you, giving you access to all of my life. That this is vulnerability. But vulnerability in its truest form is not an outer expression. It's an inner revealing. And it's an opening of the heart. True vulnerability starts with the opening of the heart. It is a willingness to be met in our innocence. And I've started to really understand the innocence of the heart and the innocence of our eternal nature as being without agenda. I actually was just observing animals, and, I'm sure like most of you, I have a very, very deep affinity with, connection to, and love for animals. I even get emotional thinking about animals. I always have since I was a child, and I've always wondered why. Why do I just love to observe animals and be around them? And I think it's because it connects us to this innocence that I'm speaking about. And this innocence, and there are different facets to innocence, but I think one of the key threads of innocence that we share with all beings is that it's without an agenda. Animals don't have an agenda. That's why they can feel so trustworthy to those who have, been hurt by other humans. That you often find that really sensitive people tend to align more with animals than they do with people, because you can feel that there isn't an agenda with an animal. I mean, okay, perhaps with the exception of cats, because cats always want you to remember your place, right? But I love cats. But, that element of I can be as I am and you're going to be as you are. And we can drop the facades, we can drop the masks, we can drop the assumptions about how we're supposed to be in this space and actually just be. And so to actually land in deeper states of vulnerability and intimacy in our connections requires us to be willing to be without an agenda. And it's an internal revealing, as I've said. It is an internal position. I can be vulnerable without outwardly expressing in any particular way. I don't need to be wailing to be vulnerable. I don't need to be expressing in loud ways to be vulnerable. That may be an expression of vulnerability. But actually, sometimes the simplest acts and the simplest moments and gestures are the most vulnerable. I recently went to an ecstatic dance event in London for my New Year's Eve celebration. And it's just a gorgeous company that runs these events. They're sober events. And they are spaces where this vulnerability is encouraged for us to just be as we are without an agenda in our movement and in our experience. And I noticed within myself the vulnerability of making eye contact with other beings where you're not doing it to look at them, like check them out. You're not doing it to be checked out or to have some agenda about what are we sizing each other up, where you're just meeting human to human. There is a vulnerability in that. There is a vulnerability in expressing in a way that's raw and unfiltered. So during that event, at one point the speaker system went down for a few minutes, so we then gathered in a huge circle, like over 100 people in this room, and people were dancing through the space and being just themselves, so as I moved through the space myself, and I think I was doing some twirling, and I remember feeling almost like the freeze, the paralysis of, oh my gosh, I'm so exposed right now. You know, I've got a really performative aspect that really loves to be, I'm Leo stellium, I love to be like, you know, center stage, performing, making people laugh, making people feel. But there is an element beyond that Leo-esque quality that I have that feels very, very vulnerable in being seen. And I felt that just that raw, tender, ooh, I'm really exposed right now. Are they going to see how weird I am? Are they going to see how ungraceful I am sometimes? Are they going to see how, you know, I don't have it all figured out? All of these unconscious or subconscious, or just perhaps areas that live and sort of reside within the shadow more, are exposed when we choose to move towards vulnerability and intimacy. But that's the key to the healing, and that's where the medicine lies. When we choose to no longer play at that superficial level, and we let the heart and the energetics of love lead us instead of what's false, instead of fear, instead of contraction. And that is why I believe this hunger and this increasing desire for actual intimacy and vulnerability, first at a micro level that is burgeoning, is really essential for collective healing. Because the patterns of relating, whether that's at a micro level or on the world stage between governments and you know, politicians and states and blah, 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 it's the same pattern. It's this warring consciousness that wants to feel righteous, that wants to feel powerful, that wants to maintain a sense of control, that wants to dominate or oppress, that is being chosen over and over and over again instead of the truth, instead of the vulnerability of the heart, instead of that third way. The Rumi quote has been coming to me a lot recently. Beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. You've got the right doing and the wrong doing. You've got the us versus them. You've got the binary, right, that we operate from when we're in this warring consciousness of I'm right, you're wrong. And then there's the third way of love. And that way requires a shitload of courage. And it requires us to be willing to be unguarded and to be witnessed in our beingness without agenda, without guard, without a backup plan, without, in an organic way that is not trying to manipulate or coerce and doesn't have a subtle agenda. That requires vulnerability because there's no guaranteed outcome in that space. And that shift is, as with all things, first an internal one. And this kind of warring consciousness is so alive at the time of filming because we're going through a Mars retrograde and there's just this huge reconfiguration of masculine energy and how we use it in the world, along with lots of other energetic influences. But archetypally, what I feel from this time is there is this invitation for us to see how can we start choosing the third way in our lives? And where do we really feel called to start choosing the third way? Where we're just exhausted by these false ways of relating to one another. And we actually want something that's fucking real. Like, stop giving me fast fucking food. I'm starving here. I'm starving of actual nourishment. I'm starving of true embrace. I'm starving here. Like, give me something real. That is what I feel we are screaming within ourselves, individually and collectively. And I feel that this internal shift we're feeling is a direct response to the burgeoning warring consciousness. And let's be honest, there has been warring consciousness on Earth for a long time. It's not that war is a new concept, But the scale of the war in consciousness and the ways in which we are seeing it reflected to us in all forms across the globe is quite unprecedented. There are mirrors being held up to us in almost every possible way that war is alive within collective consciousness, and the solution also resides within us. But the actual solution requires incredible strength, and not the strength we've been conditioned to invest in or believe in or favour, which is stoicism. But actually the true solution requires the strength of being seen, witnessed in your vulnerability, the willingness to be intimate, the willingness to be wrong, the willingness to be exposed as a fallible, flawed, imperfect being, a willingness to be witnessed in your shame, your grief, your guilt, your uncertainty, your loss, your sense of powerlessness, in your innocence, your tenderness. And I feel within myself that the heart, or at least my heart and my experience of the collective heart, is really asking this now. Can you have the courage, first within your own life, before it could ever be seen on the world stage, can you have the courage to notice where do you still operate from these warring paradigms and this paradigm of, we call it separation and operating in binaries, the lower expression of tribe mentality. And where is your heart asking you to take the third way? To recognize that beyond right doing and wrong doing, there is a unifying place, and that is the way of love. It's truth. That truth may not be a universal truth. So it may not be that we both agree if it's between me and another person. We may not agree on the way, right? But it's just being willing to acknowledge what is actually true for me. What is true for you? Like, what is really here? This is on vulnerability and intimacy. It's not perfect coherence and there's no disagreements and that's not it. It's, can we hold space for what's true and real without pulling away, without shutting down, without avoiding, without denying? And can we be with what's here? And I've noticed within myself that when I let myself sit in the vulnerable space within me, often the body starts to have physical responses. So I'll start to notice that, like, somatically at a body-based level, I'll maybe tremble, maybe my lip will quiver, my jaw might quiver a bit. There's an actual somatic response to vulnerability because it feels scary and it feels exposing and it can feel unsafe. And I've noticed that that's part of the reason why sometimes I don't allow myself to be there, because I have stories and fears and judgments of myself, and then what I fear what others will think of me if they see me in those states, and we have all of these unconscious facades that we're trying to maintain. The one that's got it all together, the one that knows, blah, 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 whatever it is. And vulnerability is the willingness to let all of those things go, to let those identities go, and to actually just to be in the raw, open, vulnerable space of what's here. Not as an identity, not as a role, but as the being, the organic being, whose presence and emanation is not contained or defined by any role or identity. And I do feel that this is, at a micro level, beginning to move us to relate differently, so that can become habituated and normalized within collective consciousness. In my last video, I spoke about the neural pathways of the new earth starting to be re-established. Well, neural pathways require repetition to be established. And it starts small. It starts with micro habits and with micro repetition. And that, for me, is how we make these shifts towards a different paradigm on Earth. It's not necessarily grand top-down shifts. It's actually, I think, a building of the micro conscious and intentional shifts at the micro level that will change the macro. I think that's the only way, actually, because the collective is made up of individuals. The collective is made up of you and me and billions of others. So we have to get honest about how we're showing up in our connections and what consciousness we're relating from and what paradigms we're upholding before we can ever really seek to try and create change at the collective level. Because we can't change our politicians. We can't change the way that they operate. We can't change the systems and the structures to be anything new, innovative, heart-centered. You know, there can be a lot of activism and physical reformation, as there always has been, but that doesn't change the energetics. Unless you're changing the consciousness from which you act, what actually changes? The faces change, the buildings change, the legislations change names, but does the energy of the systems, of the global infrastructure change? No, of course it doesn't. It's the same consciousness being reenacted over and over and over and over again. So the medicine the world is hungry for to actually be able to be fit and able to move into a space where we are like working together instead of at war with one another actually requires us to start doing this work first at a micro level. I'm really working on this in my own life. I have moved through some really significant challenges in my personal relationship recently, and this has been a portal, a doorway for me to see, okay, I can see all of the habituated ways I want to respond. I can see all the ways I'm guarding and protecting, and I'm trying to dance around the intimacy of and the vulnerability of the heart, and I can feel the light of my heart saying, you know that's not the way. You know the way. It's here. And you might not like it at an egoic level. You might not like how vulnerable you feel, how exposed you feel, how unsafe you feel, how naked you feel. And this is the only way that you will create the change. And that what's crucial with vulnerability and intimacy is it can only really be born out of a state of consciousness where there is no expectation of the outcome. If we are in some way attached to the outcome, we will try to manipulate or coerce at some level. Part of what comes with true vulnerability and intimacy is actually the unknown. It's actually right now I'm operating from the now moment, from what's true and real right now, not what was true and real 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago, but what is alive and present right now, the highest truth that I can access right now. And I'm not dancing around that, I'm really sitting in it and as it. And I don't know what's going to happen as a result of me being rooted in this. I don't know what the outcome will be. That's terrifying. I don't know. And yet, do we have the courage to trust that when we honor the truth and when we honor love, the highest good prevails? It does require surrender. It does require faith. It does require courage. It's scary as fuck. And it will also get easier the more we do it. And once we start reconfiguring our relationships for this way, it won't always feel like potentially facing a firing squad or like death, you know? Like, God, this is so scary. This will at some point be normal within our relationships. I think true vulnerability and intimacy will always be scary because we're always reaching new depths of what's present, and we're always meeting deeper aspects of our being, you know? We're always kind of expanding into unknown territory. That process doesn't ever end, but perhaps we become more adept and able to really engage in this process. And I do believe that the new relational template for life on earth is founded upon this. This is one of the fundamental threads. It is a willingness to step away from warring right and wrong consciousness and actually come to that third way of truth and love, which requires us to be willing to transcend the personal ideas we have about ourselves and others, the personal agenda we have to keep ourselves safe or to maintain control, and to actually hand over the moment and the direction of whatever's going to unfold to the divine. Requires tremendous faith. I also believe that we will only ever experience the depths that we are hungry for. We will only ever quench the thirst that we've had for so long when we start meeting ourselves at these depths again, and also meeting others at these depths. And really an intimate connection. All relationships are chambers of growth. They are, in their highest potential, mirrors for us to meet ourselves. And so that is why relationships are such profound chambers, because it is in the willingness to be seen and witnessed and show up in connections in this way and be met by another presence in that way that we are actually meeting those parts of ourselves. It's one thing to sort of perhaps be less guarded alone. It's a very different thing in connection. That's why connections and relationships are so powerful, because they really show us where we're embodied in the wisdom that we know and where we're still hiding and dodging that wisdom and trying to dance around it because it feels scary, and we have abandonment wounds and we're fallible and we've got animal programming, nervous systems that remember scary times and traumatic experiences, and also that we are in the same breath divine beings seeking expansion and the return to love. So there is a marriage that is being reconciled now, where we bring our humanity along with us on this journey, where we start reforming our nervous systems, where we start rebuilding safety within these bodies at a somatic level, so that we can actually start to contain and expand in and as the divine, embodied. And I believe that vulnerability and intimacy is a really fundamental part of this process. So thank you for being with me on this journey of exploring this. It's always a pleasure and an honour to connect in this way. And I look forward to connecting with you again in the next transmission.